Following Jesus isn't always easy, but it's not complicated. This is Simple Faith in 5. Each weekday, we take the teachings of Jesus combined with a spiritual discipline and grow our faith in 5-minute moments. Click subscribe to make sure you don't miss a one of them. I think of a man named Frank who cared for his wife through a long illness. Every morning he helped her dress, made her breakfast, managed medications, drove her to appointments, no stage, no spotlight, no applause. And when someone at church told him, "I don't know how you do it," he simply said, "Well, this is what love looks like for us." It doesn't make the headlines, but heaven noticed. Ruth's story is like that. Quiet faithfulness, costly love, ordinary obedience, that, in God's hands, reshaped history. Today, I want to take you to one of the most tender and hope-filled stories in all of Scripture, the story of Ruth. If Tamar shows us God at work in injustice, if Rahab shows us God's grace for the outsider, and if Bathsheba shows us God's healing in trauma, then Ruth reveals something warm and steady. God honors quiet faithfulness. Ruth was a Moabite woman who married into an Israelite family living far from home because of famine. But tragedy hit hard. Her husband died, her brother-in-law died, her father-in-law died, and suddenly it was just 3 widows standing in the wreckage of dreams they never expected to lose. Naomi, heartbroken and empty, decided to return to Bethlehem. She urged her daughters-in-law to stay in Moab, rebuild their lives and new husbands, and start fresh. One daughter-in-law did just that, but Ruth clung to her. And she spoke words so full of love and loyalty that they still echo through centuries. She said, "Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God." Those weren't just pretty words, they were a declaration of faith. Ruth was choosing Naomi. She was choosing Israel. She was choosing the God of Abraham, and she was stepping away from everything familiar to embrace a future she couldn't see. When they arrived in Bethlehem, Ruth quietly went out to glean, gathering leftover grain behind harvesters just to feed Naomi and herself. She ended up in the fields of Boaz, a relative of Naomi's late husband. Boaz noticed her humility, her devotion, her hard work. He protected her. He made sure she gathered safely, and he spoke kindly to her, a spark of grace in a hard season. Then Naomi, wise and hopeful, saw an opportunity. She instructed Ruth to approach Boaz on the threshing floor, essentially asking him to fulfill the family's duty and redeem their household. Ruth did everything with gentleness, modesty, and courage, and Boaz responded with honor and integrity. He promised to do what was right, even checking first with a nearer relative. When that relative declined, Boaz joyfully married Ruth. Their son Obed would become the grandfather of King David, and from David's line would come Jesus, the Redeemer of all nations. Now, Jewish tradition absolutely treasures Ruth. They see in her the perfect example of someone who chooses God freely and wholeheartedly. Her famous words to Naomi are still used in traditional conversation and conversion ceremonies. The rabbis praise her modesty, her compassion, her humility. They even call her a Moabite princess, someone who willingly traded privilege and comfort for a life of service and love among God's people. And all throughout Jewish teaching, one word rises again and again over Ruth's story, and that is loving kindness. Not kindness that waits for convenience, kindness that acts at a cost. Ruth embodied it in her devotion to Naomi. What's beautiful is the irony here. Moabites as a people were criticized in Scripture for lacking hospitality and kindness. Yet Ruth, a Moabite woman, becomes the shining example of kindness in all the Bible. It's as if God is saying, don't judge a whole people by their past. Look at what I can do in one faithful heart. And when Matthew opens his gospel, he places Ruth right there in Jesus' genealogy. A Gentile, a widow, a woman of humble means, but also a woman of extraordinary faith. So what does Ruth's story mean for us today? It tells us that God notices the quiet choices, the ones no one else sees. It tells us that faithfulness in hard seasons still matters. It tells us that loving another person with steady, sacrificial kindness can change the world in ways we'll never fully see. Ruth didn't preach sermons or perform miracles. She didn't lead armies or confront kings, but she simply showed up with loyalty, humility, courage, and love, and God wrote her into the story of redemption. Maybe today you feel ordinary. Maybe your life feels small, or your faith feels quiet. Maybe you wonder if your kindness even matters. Ruth's life whispers back, God sees, God honors, and God uses people just like you to write chapters of grace. So as you go into your day, remember Ruth, a woman who teaches us that the most beautiful faith often grows from the simplest acts of love. This week we're practicing the spiritual discipline of Lectio Divina. I want you to read Ruth chapter 1 verse 16 slowly. Meditate on it. Let one phrase sink in. Where you go, I will go. Carry that phrase with you and pray, Lord, teach me this kind of faithful love. This is Lectio Divina in its simplest form, one verse held all day. Well, have a great day, and as always, keep it simple.